Hey everyone, my name is Jonah Horn. You guys probably already know that by now. And this is video blog 3 titled Mini Experiment. Oops. And in this video blog, I will be discussing and revisiting, or I guess reapplying the WUG test, Jean Berko's the WUG test, to adults. So a little background about the WUG test. Jean Berko in 1958 put out an article, among others. It was called Children's Learning of English Morphology. And this study aimed to answer the question, can children apply affixes to new words? And so in this study, a child is shown pictures of fake creatures or activities, and then they would fill in statements that were made about them. So for instance, when they would say, "This is a WUG," and they'd show them a picture, and they'd say, "Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two." And so the child would fill in the sentence or the statement, and you would predict they would say two WUGs. So they were testing basically if children could hear. So children could just hear and memorize plurals, and so pseudo words like "wug," inanimate or nonsense words are used to see if children apply these general rules to situations like that. So, like for instance, you would say "wugs" with the z instead of with more of an s, like snake sounding, because you are ending the word "wug" g in a voiced ending. So you would put the z like you would in dogs and bugs and wugs. So let's see. I don't want to take too much time on this. The results, they basically found that young children can produce plurals, past tenses, and possessives, and others to nonsense words. But then when they did this on even younger children, the younger children basically had seemed to memorize some of the singular and plural pairs. So it kind of showed that eventually they might start out memorizing trends or memorizing pairs, but then they eventually learn these rules and patterns. The second thing I looked at, the second research article, was called the WUG Technique Revisited. And I just looked at their abstract. Their whole article is not online, but it is indeed at the bookstore, at the U of A bookstore. And so basically, this was by Yonata Levy, and it's in Cognitive Development Volume 2. And she conducted 2 experiments testing 31 7-year-olds and 23 2-year-olds that were Hebrew native speakers, native speakers, for their knowledge of pluralization of real and nonce nouns. So 2-year-olds pluralized nonce and real nouns the same. This is what they found. But 7-year-olds didn't actually know really how to handle the case of these nonsense nouns. So the WUG test, what they found from this is the WUG test may be more adequate for assessing knowledge of a linguistic system while it's still being learned, rather than while it's already learned and starting to be applied. So my research question was, for my new test on adults with this WUG-like test, is do native English-speaking adults apply general grammatical rules to nonsense words to generate derivational and inflectional morphemes? So it's a mouthful, but I basically want to see, is it that, or do adults memorize the correct pronunciation of every single plural, and they don't apply general grammatical rules? So one other alternative hypothesis could be that the WUG-like test, like discussed in the article done by Yonata Levy, the WUG-like test may not be sufficient to generalize to adults. So those are a couple different options. So my hypothesis is that native English speakers will apply general grammatical rules to create nonsense morphemes when given the appropriate context. So basically I'm saying that in my study it'll make more sense, but as far as pluralization goes, adults will use a z ending that sound with a voiced ending like they did in the WUG test, or like you would assume an adult would. So the methods. So my independent variable was grammar application ability, and my dependent variable, which was dependent of the independent, was generated derivational and inflectional morphemes. So what was generated by the adults. And so my participants were 2 native English-speaking adults. So I should point out that this is most likely doesn't probably have the best external validity. But anyway, it was 2 native English-speaking adults, 1 female, 58 years old, my mother. I know you're not supposed to ask women their age. Anyway, and then 1 male, 22-year-old, my next-door neighbor. So the task was I showed them pictures I showed them a picture of a fish walking on stilts, and I know it's a little obscure, but anyway, so that was my materials. It was just a picture of fish walking on stilts. So I showed them the picture, and then I tested them inflectionally and derivationally, or I basically gave them 2 different tests. An inflectional test, which was I said this is a glub. So I'll go here. This is a glub. This is also a glub. In this picture, there are a lot of blank, and so I'd have them fill that in. So for the derivational test, that was the inflectional test. The derivational test was the glubs in this picture bosh daily. They are in fact paid to bosh. As their job title states, they are considered to be blank. So I think I stretched this one a little bit, but I was basically assuming, back to my hypothesis, I was assuming they would say, for inflectional, I would assume they'd say glubs, right? Glubs, because it's a voiced. So I'll go to my hypothesis, back to my hypothesis, and then to the results. So I predicted essentially that adults would end in the z ending due to the fact that the ending of the word is voiced. Glub. And so I predicted glubs was the pronunciation, and I also predicted that it just sounded better, and the pattern would be you would assume an adult to say, if I threw a nonsense verb and I said this is someone who boshes and is paid to bosh, you would assume that they're a bosher. Or, I mean, that's what I would have assumed. And so what I found is that my results partially supported my hypothesis. I better hurry up here. I always go over time. So both adults, my mom and my neighbor, Josh, both adults showed the proper use of the z sound with a voiced ending. So they both said glubs. And then for the derivational test, only 1 out of 2 responded to the derivational test as expected. So my mom said bosher, and my friend Josh, he could have been giving me a hard time, but he paused and didn't really know what I was getting at, or at least that's what it seemed. And so he said, I wrote it down. He paused. He said bosh artist. So he kind of wasn't. He didn't know if that's what I was asking. So maybe there was some room for error. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. But essentially, what I found was the WUG test format might not be appropriate for testing adults. Other than that, overall, hard to say with 2 participants, but adults did at least show signs of being able to pluralization, and which would include inflectional, and then they did not. I mean, 1 out of 2, 50% isn't a good enough statistic to say that they were able to apply this to derivational morphemes. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry to rush this. I have interviews on the 9th coming up, so I'm getting ready to pack, and I'm all over the place. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll attach a PDF too. Thank you.